Hello, thank you so much for joining me today on this video about Power Query. We will be talking about one of the properties, Enable Background Refresh. I will show you two situations to explain why I think it is important to pay attention to this property. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you think it's useful for your work. Don't forget to share and spread the news. Okay, let's start. So we have a blank workbook here, and first I want to show you what I am talking about. Let's create a query from scratch. Get data from file, from workbook, and here on my desktop I have this folder, and one of the files is the data file. Let's open that. In this file we have two sheets, and each sheet has one table. Let's select here where it says select multiple items, and let's go and select these two tables. Go to transform data, and let's see what we have here. So we have table clients that Power Query already decided the data type for each column. Everything looks good. And sales table, the same thing. So we created two queries at the same time, one for each table. Headers look good, so we don't need to do anything. Let's suppose we don't need to do anything with this data, we just need to load it to our workbook. So let's go close and load to. We can say table and new worksheet, that's fine. I'm not going to add to the data model at this point. We have our two queries and we have our two tables here. What I'm talking about is when we go here, right click and choose properties, we can see that this property, Enable Background Refresh, has a check mark. Is enabled, let's say like that. Let's go and see the other one. Same thing. So this is the default behavior on Power Query. I don't seem to find anywhere on general Power Query properties where we could possibly change this default behavior. So we need to be aware that this is what's happening by default. And why is this important? We will get there in a minute. What happens if we change the load to destination? If we decide to add this to the data model, it's asking me for permission to do that. I'm going to say yes. So now we have this table added to the data model. If we check the properties of the query again, we can see that now we don't have the ability to choose to enable or not the background refresh. If we go and change the loading destination to only create connection, okay, so the table now will disappear, the query is still here. If we now check the properties, we still have the ability to enable background refresh or not, okay? Okay, so let's see. So let's close this workbook, and now let's look at two different examples. Every month we receive this file, the CSV file, all sales, it's the name of the file, and this file contains information about sales, and it's growing over the time. So in this case we have data for January and February, and that's it. The next month we will get a new file that has March information about sales appended at the bottom of the file. And we want to do some analysis on this data. This is an Excel file that has a query already built. So at this moment we have information for January and February. This is the table with all our data. And the user decided to create a pivot table based on this table. Okay, so if you go here, let's close this pane, pivot table, change data source, we can see the data source is our table all sales that is the result of the query. Okay, in this case we have information for January and February. Okay, let's go and check what the properties are for this query. We can see that we have the default check mark on enable background refresh. So what we are going to do to test this now is to replace this file with March file. Okay, so I'm going to delete this. I'm going to pick my file for March that I have on a separate folder. I'm going to put it here and I'm going to change the name to all sales only, because that's how Power Query knows how to find the data. Okay, we can check the data inside of this CSV file, and we have January, February, and March dates, and that's it. Okay, so now we are expecting that when we refresh, we get updated information in both the table and the pivot table, right? So let's click on the table or anywhere, just click refresh all. What happened here? You can see that now we have the dates until March, up to March, but nothing happened with our pivot table. What happens if I click refresh all again? Now I get my pivot table updated. So what is really happening here? When we have that property enabled, what we are saying, what we are telling to Power Query and to our system is, okay, every time you need to refresh a query, if the query has the property enable background refresh enabled, we are authorizing the system to move on with other tasks and without needing to wait for that query to be complete. Okay, the pivot table doesn't wait for, although the pivot table is depending on this table, needs the table to be updated first to get the correct data on the pivot table report. It's not waiting for the Power Query table to be finished. So it refreshes, and in fact it does that before even the query is complete. Therefore the data is not updated correctly. Then when we did a second refresh, we already had at that time this table finished. So the pivot table went ahead, but at this time the information needed was available, so it refreshed. Okay, in this scenario I would go to the query properties and disable this property here. Okay, let's close this. Excel is behaving awkwardly there. And before we do our refresh all, let's bring new data here. So I'm going to delete this file and I'm going to bring April's file. Okay, let's just change the name of the file here. Let's call it all sales. Okay, so let's do refresh all. Let's see what happens. We can see already the pivot table now has information up to April, and same thing happened here. So in a situation like this, it's very important to pay attention to that property to make sure that the different updates in our file happen on the proper time. Okay, so that's one of the examples I wanted to show you. When we have pivot tables and Power Query tables, the Power Query tables take longer to update. So if pivot tables depend on the Power Query tables, we need to give time to Power Query. Let's disable that property there. Okay. Now let's see another example. In this situation, we have also CSV files with data. Each file has data for 1 month. Let's open this one. So we have only January dates here. And all the other ones are March, February, March, and April, 1 per month. And we have the data tool file that has macros in VBA. And the purpose of this tool is to transform the data that is on the CSV file and create a new CSV file with the data reshaped. The data sheet here, now I don't have any data. This is a table that will be filled by Power Query through one of the queries, the only one here. And at the moment, the table is empty because I deleted all the rows. It says 182 rows, but I deleted them so that we can see what's happening here. It doesn't matter, so it just goes to the source and then transforms columns and reorders columns, changes some of the structure of the data to fit the user's needs. So let's go and see what happens. The query is pointing to a file named data.csv. And that file is this file here. I'm going to use a similar procedure. Let's go and call January file data.csv. So let's go back to our Excel file. We have a button here that will run a macro. And what that macro does, it only has one macro. And what it does is it refreshes the query data that we have and then creates a new workbook, copying the information on sheet data into that book. Okay, copies values and formats and then applies no filling color, and then it saves the file on a specific folder with a specific format for the name of the file. That's what it does. Okay, let's check the properties for this query. We have enable background refresh property enabled, which is the default. So let's go and see what happens when you run this macro. You wait a little bit. It says the process is complete. Now we have our table here. We have data from January. And it was supposed to create a CSV file in the folder Final Reports. Let's see what we have here. And what we have here is a CSV file with no data in it. So it was supposed to copy the information from the Power Query table and put the information here and save it as a CSV format. It only brought the header row. So let's go and try again. See what happens. So I'm going to now replace data CSV file with the file with data from February. All right, so let's see what we get now. Let's go to this sheet here, click the button. We see Power Query doing its thing and VBA. We got our data updated to February. Let's see what happened to our transformed data file. And we got a file with data from January. Isn't that weird? So we have data here, February, and then when it's copied over to the CSV file, we get the data that we had here before. And again, what's happening is that VBA is carrying on with the procedures the macro is instructing it to do before waiting for Power Query to finish its business with updating the data information. By the way, you see when I click here on a date cell, I get this icon here. This is available here. It's a date picker add-in. I will tell you about these at the end. Okay, so let's go and do the same change. Let's go here to our query and just change that property, okay? Let's uncheck this. Enable background refresh. No, we don't want to refresh on the background. We want to do it and stay there until it's over, then move on to other things that you need to do. Okay, so we have February data here, right? Let's go and replace it with March data. So let's delete the file data. So now our file has data from March. Let's go back, transform data. Okay. We see our table now has dates from March. Let's go check our new CSV file in the final reports folder. This file here, the third one. And now we do have data for March. So we transformed March data, we waited the data to be available in our file, and then we created the CSV file with this data. Okay, so again, in this case, we cannot allow Power Query to keep the refreshing on the background of the query while we move on to other tasks. We need to wait for that refreshing to be complete. I don't know about you, but for me, most of the situations I deal with, I don't want Power Query to allow background refresh. So the ideal for me would be to have that setting not checked as default. And when we wanted to allow that, then we would go and would put a check mark when in the scenarios where we think that is useful. If you agree with me, then maybe you would like to vote. I just posted this idea here on Excel UserVoice platform, and I am asking the Power Query team to make this property not checked by default. Okay? If you wanted to support this idea, just come to the link. I will put it on the video description below, and you can help us with modifying this setting. Okay, and finally, I wanted to tell you about two add-ins built by Sam Radakovitz. You can find them on his website, samradapps.com. One is the Excel date picker, extremely useful, that you saw working on one of my worksheets. And the other one is the app Fake Data, that allows us to create sets of fake data to do demonstrations like the one I just did. I used Sam's app Fake Data to create most of the data that I used for the demonstrations today. On the right, you have Mr. Excel's YouTube channel. He has two videos explaining about fake data. That's the one here, and also one explaining how you can use the date picker. I will also put those two links below on the video description. And as you can see, Bill Jelen, Mr. Excel YouTube channel is almost reaching the 1,000 subscribers milestone. It would be great to see him celebrate that milestone very, very soon. If you are not a subscriber of this YouTube channel, but you are interested in learning Excel and be on top of what is new and what is happening with Excel evolution, please do go there now and subscribe. It's one of the best YouTube channels to learn about Excel and to find information about what's the newest of the newest. Okay. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope the video was useful for you. Let me know in the comments if you were already aware of the enable background refresh property and if you are using it correctly. Thank you so much. See you next time.